Dr. Serial had once been a name that sparked pride and hope across the galaxy. She was a scientist of unrivaled brilliance, an alien from the planet Zarvan, renowned for her unyielding dedication to unraveling the mysteries of universal health. Her research into genetic adaptability promised to transform the lives of countless beings, offering a cure for genetic disorders that plague species across the Galactic Union. Serial's mission was driven by a desire for unity and compassion, something she believed every species deserved. But as her research progressed, Serial discovered something alarming, a truth that went against everything she stood for. The Galactic Union, the powerful council governing interplanetary relations and scientific endeavors, wasn't interested in healing the galaxy. Behind their polished rhetoric and promises of peace, they were secretly developing biological weapons. Her research, the very work she had poured her soul into, was being twisted into a weapon to target lesser species, those they deemed inferior or disposable. The realization hit Serial like a crushing weight, and for a moment, she couldn't fathom how those in power could so casually betray her ideals and the countless lives her work could have saved. Driven by a fierce sense of justice, Serial took a dangerous step. She attempted to expose the conspiracy, to reveal the Union's true intentions. She thought the galaxy would rally behind her. After all, she was fighting for their survival, for a future where all species were treated as equals. But the response was swift and brutal. The Galactic Union branded her a traitor, stripping her of her accolades, erasing her from the ranks of respected scientists, and severing all her connections. Her colleagues, once her friends, turned their backs on her out of fear or loyalty to the Union. Within days, her identity was scrubbed from official records, and whispers of her betrayal spread like wildfire. The Union wasn't content with just silencing her. They wanted to make an example of her. She was exiled to an inhospitable prison moon, a place where only the condemned were sent to die. This barren, toxic landscape was a death sentence in all but name. Serial's home planet, her colleagues, even her family, all of them abandoned her. There was no one left willing to stand up for her or even acknowledge her existence. The prison moon's atmosphere was laced with toxic gases, unbreathable for her kind without constant refiltering. Food was scarce, little more than ration pellets that barely sustained her, and water was an acidic trickle that stung her throat and left a metallic taste in her mouth. Days turned to weeks, and Serial found herself slipping into despair. She had once been Zarvan's pride, a beacon of hope and progress, but here she was, alone and abandoned, betrayed by the very system she'd worked so hard to uplift. She thought about giving up, letting the toxins in the air take her. But something held her back, a quiet, stubborn resolve, a spark of resistance. Even in this desolation, she could not bear the thought of her work dying with her. Somewhere, she hoped, her discoveries could still help others. While Serial's struggle continued on the prison moon, far away, a small team of human scientists and explorers monitored the situation with growing concern. Humanity, new to the Galactic Union, had been relegated to a marginal role. They were still learning the complex power dynamics and politics that governed the Union, and often, other species dismissed them as simple-minded or naive. But what other species saw as human simplicity, the humans themselves knew as empathy, a fierce, unyielding drive to stand by the vulnerable, to help even those they barely knew. Among these humans was Dr. Ava Ramirez, a geneticist who had followed Serial's research long before the scandal and had been inspired by her ideals of equality and compassion. Ava, along with a small group of human scientists and explorers, admired Serial's courage in standing up against the Galactic Union. When they heard whispers of her imprisonment, they felt both anger and horror at the way Serial had been abandoned. To the humans, the notion of leaving someone to die alone, especially for trying to do the right thing, was incomprehensible. They knew they had to do something, even if it meant defying the Union's unspoken rules. In hushed, late-night conversations, Ava and her team devised a plan. It was dangerous and possibly reckless. They didn't have much in the way of resources, and their own government officials would never approve of such an operation. But to Ava and her team, Serial's courage warranted an equal response. No one else would help her, which only made their resolve stronger. They decided to pose as a routine mining crew, a common enough presence on the fringes of restricted areas, where valuable minerals were often extracted for intergalactic trade. This guise would allow them to approach the prison moon without raising suspicion. The risks were enormous. The Galactic Union strictly controlled who could access the prison zones, and breaking that rule was punishable by severe sanctions or even imprisonment. For the humans, whose place in the Union was already precarious, this was a gamble that could jeopardize their standing in the galaxy. Ava's team discussed every angle, weighed the dangers, and finally, in unison, made a choice. They would go, because to them, this was about more than politics or power, it was a matter of principle. With their roles assigned and plans set, they ventured out, disguising their mission as a simple mining operation. It was a quiet, tense journey as they approached the restricted prison zone. Each member of the team knew the stakes, yet none of them wavered. They were driven by something that no amount of galactic protocol or threats could dampen, their belief that every life, every act of courage, mattered. As they neared the prison moon, their sensors detected the harsh environment that had nearly broken Serial. Toxic winds, a thin, barely breathable atmosphere, and constant radiation spikes made it clear why no one was expected to survive here. Despite the hostile conditions, the humans pressed on, driven by the thought of Serial struggling alone. They managed to bypass detection systems, carefully landing on the moon and preparing their equipment for the search. As they began their search, Ava couldn't shake the image of Serial alone, stripped of everything she'd fought for, waiting in hopeless isolation. For them, this wasn't just about rescuing a scientist. It was about standing up to an injustice they couldn't ignore. In their hearts, they understood that Serial represented something greater, a beacon of resilience that needed to be protected. The humans arrived on the prison moon, their hearts racing with the weight of their mission. The desolate landscape stretched before them, with jagged, rocky terrain under a sickly, hazy sky. Toxic clouds swirled above, and each step kicked up dust laced with poisonous particles. They moved carefully, their breathing equipment hissing softly, reminding them of the hostile environment around them. Despite the barren silence, the team was filled with an unspoken urgency. They knew Serial's time was running out. They split up, moving through crumbling corridors and narrow paths between twisted, rocky outcroppings, their sensors searching for any trace of life. Their handheld scanners flickered as they scanned the area, mapping the sparse structures scattered across the moon. Finally, a faint, weak signal appeared on Ava's screen, a barely detectable life reading, nearly lost in the background radiation. She called the others over, and they followed the signal, weaving through the rocky terrain, pushing forward as they came closer to their goal. When they reached her location, they found Serial slumped against a jagged rock formation, her form frail and barely moving. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin bore signs of exposure to the toxins around her. For a moment, the team was struck by the sight. Here was a brilliant mind, someone who had given her life to protect others, reduced to this vulnerable state, abandoned by her own people. Ava knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on Serial's shoulder. Serial's eyes fluttered open, a mix of confusion and disbelief clouding her gaze as she registered the faces in front of her. She couldn't comprehend why humans, of all beings, were here, reaching out to her in her final moments. "Dr. Serial," Ava said softly, "we're here to get you out. You're not alone anymore." Serial's face tightened with emotion, a flicker of hope igniting in her tired eyes. She tried to speak, but the effort was too much. She simply nodded, a look of gratitude and disbelief etched into her features. For Serial, this moment was surreal. A species she had barely known, thought of as mere spectators in the grand stage of galactic affairs, had risked everything to come to her aid. The team quickly assessed her condition and began stabilizing her as best they could, administering oxygen and small doses of hydration fluid. They knew they had to move fast. The Union's patrols could sweep by at any time, and staying too long on the moon would only increase the chance of being caught. Carefully, they lifted her, making their way back to the ship while maintaining constant vigilance. Each step was filled with tension as they retraced their path, moving as quickly and quietly as possible, the harsh winds clawing at their suits. Inside the ship, they placed Serial in a medical pod to counter the effects of the toxic exposure. As the ship lifted off, Ava watched Serial's face relax, her breathing deepening as the treatment began to work. The atmosphere in the cabin was a mix of relief and awe. They had done it, they had pulled her from the brink. But beyond the satisfaction of the rescue, there was something else. A realization of the bond they now shared, the silent understanding that they had chosen to stand beside her when no one else would. Once they were safely beyond the moon's range, Serial slowly regained her strength, her voice hoarse but determined. She looked at the humans surrounding her and spoke with a quiet intensity. "I never thought no one in the galaxy would help me." Ava met her gaze and responded. "We did it because it was the right thing to do. Sometimes that's all that matters." Serial nodded, processing the unfamiliar kindness she was experiencing, something she had only ever dreamed was possible in a galaxy often filled with self-interest and betrayal. In that moment, Serial understood that this act of compassion wasn't just a rescue. It was a statement, a testament to the power of empathy. As Serial's strength returned, so did her sense of purpose. Surrounded by humans who had risked everything for her, she felt a renewed determination to complete her work, not as a weapon but as a tool for healing and unity across species. During their journey, she shared her research with the humans, explaining how she had originally hoped to use genetic adaptability to eliminate disease across different species. This wasn't just a project to her, it was a mission to give everyone in the galaxy an equal chance at life, without the fear of genetic disorders or bioweaponry looming over them. Ava and her team listened intently, their respect for Serial growing with each passing day. They understood her vision and saw how her work, if used properly, could bring about a new era of peace and health. The idea of creating something positive out of what others had tried to twist into a weapon struck a deep chord with them. They knew the risk of pursuing this path. They were now enemies of the Galactic Union, branded as outlaws simply for doing what was right. But the humans had already committed to this journey, and they were willing to take it as far as it needed to go. Together, they began to strategize, brainstorming how they could protect Serial's research and share it with the galaxy without falling into the Union's traps. Ava suggested creating an underground network, a safe channel to distribute Serial's findings to other sympathetic scientists and freedom fighters scattered across different planets. It was a bold and dangerous idea, but Serial could see that it had potential. With the humans' help, her research could live on, beyond her control, as a shared hope that no single power could destroy. The humans taught Serial about encryption, secure channels, and ways to communicate without being traced. They helped her prepare digital copies of her work, protected by layers of security protocols, making it nearly impossible for the Union to track. Every member of Ava's team played a part, whether it was coordinating safe houses on distant planets, establishing contacts with species sympathetic to their cause, or finding ways to cloak their transmissions from the Union's eyes. As days turned to weeks, their efforts began to bear fruit. Small cells of allies formed in hidden pockets across the galaxy, scientists, engineers, and activists who believed in Serial's vision. Her research circulated quietly, reaching species that had long been under the Union's thumb, providing them with tools to build resistance, both through health and hope. For the first time in her life, Serial felt that her work was truly achieving what she had set out to do, to make a difference, to empower those who had been overlooked or oppressed. Through it all, Serial's bond with her human allies grew. They were unlike any beings she had ever known, fierce yet compassionate, relentless in their drive to help even when they stood to gain nothing. This was more than a mission to them, it was a way of life, a belief in the right to freedom and dignity for all beings. Serial came to understand that this trait, this empathy, was what truly set humanity apart, a strength that was overlooked by most other species but was now making them instrumental in the fight against the Union. As the network expanded, Ava reminded Serial of the risks involved. The Union was bound to take notice eventually, and when they did, their response would be swift and brutal. But Serial was ready. She had lost everything already, but in these humans, she had found a purpose, a team, and a cause worth fighting for. And so, with her newfound allies, she pressed on, knowing that even if they couldn't bring down the Union alone, they had ignited a flame across the galaxy that others would carry forward. What had begun as a simple rescue was now a movement, a rebellion of hope fueled by the resilience of a few humans who had dared to believe in something greater than themselves. Together, they became symbols of resistance, a reminder that compassion and courage could spark change, even in the darkest corners of the galaxy. The network grew stronger with each passing day. Messages and encoded files traveled across star systems, reaching those who yearned for freedom and change. Serial's research, once destined to be a weapon, had become a symbol of hope, a tool that gave oppressed species a chance to rise above the limitations imposed by the Galactic Union. Her formulas and techniques were being used to treat diseases, strengthen immune systems, and create resilience within countless alien species. As her work spread, stories of quiet revolutions began to surface, whispers of small colonies standing against the Union's exploitation, bolstered by the newfound health and strength her research provided. Yet, the Union was not blind to this growing rebellion. It didn't take long for the higher officials to notice the ripple effect of Serial's work. Suddenly, incidents of civil unrest and disruptive health technologies began appearing on their reports. Species they had once dismissed as weak or dependent were now growing stronger, more resistant to the Union's manipulations. The Union responded by increasing patrols, monitoring transmissions, and cracking down on any suspected dissenters. But the humans and their network had planned for this. Every time the Union shut down one cell, two more seemed to take its place, as if inspired by the very threat meant to silence them. Within the Underground Alliance, Serial became a legend. Stories of her courage and resilience spread among species that had once felt powerless. She was no longer just a scientist, she was a figure of inspiration, a being who had sacrificed everything for the good of others. For the humans, too, her presence was a constant reminder of why they had chosen this dangerous path. As the Union tightened its grip, they realized that their efforts were finally pushing the galaxy toward a tipping point. A rebellion fueled not by violence, but by unity and health, was beginning to blossom. Then came the Union's ultimatum. Facing mounting resistance and a loss of control over once compliant planets, the Union sent a final, chilling message to Serial and her human allies. They demanded an end to the distribution of Serial's research, threatening severe consequences for any further dissent. The message was clear: surrender, or be annihilated. The Union was prepared to end Serial's movement, even if it meant wiping out entire species in the process. But Serial and the humans knew there was no going back. They had ignited a spark of hope across the galaxy, and extinguishing it would only strengthen the will of those who had tasted freedom. Together, they sent out one last encrypted broadcast, a message of defiance to every corner of the Union. Serial's voice, calm and unwavering, declared that no matter the outcome, they would not surrender the chance for a better future. In the days that followed, entire planets and factions rallied in support. The Union's power was stretched thin, unable to contain the wave of rebellion sweeping across their territories. Serial's work continued to spread, adapted and improved upon by scientists, healers, and activists across countless worlds. The Union, once an indomitable force, began to fracture under the weight of its own corruption and the resistance it had inadvertently inspired. And through it all, Serial remained at the center, surrounded by her human allies who had given her a second chance at life. She looked around at the beings who had once been strangers and felt, for the first time, that she was truly part of something greater. These humans, with their unlikely empathy and fierce determination, had shown her the power of resilience and unity. Together they had taken on the might of the Union, not with weapons or armies, but with compassion, science, and an unbreakable spirit. In the end, Serial's legacy was not just in her research, but in the alliance she had helped forge, a testament to the power of hope, courage, and the belief that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could spark a revolution that even the most powerful forces couldn't suppress.